I know you know a lot of people behind the scenes and all this, but why do you think that the government is sort of hiding crashed, advanced technology from another species, right? Not even humans. Like, what makes you actually believe that has happened and is happening?
This is a really good question because it actually came up in a post the other day. I was only, I don't know, 80 or 90% sure that crash retrievals were real and all of that until like 24. And I arrived at that level of certainty just from having consumed and digested like things like Jacques Vallée's books and stories from well, first of all, David Grush's account and Lou's account, and essentially just realizing that there were a bunch of people who were not only incentivized not to lie, but they were probably incentivized to not tell you and incentivized to not actually come out and say what they had said because they gave up a really cushy life with a great salary and a bunch of benefits and just kind of
Sure.
like bombed their own life, carpet bombed their
Yeah.
own life. I mean, when I saw Kirk McConnell on stage, 37-year SASC veteran, top secret SCI for probably before I was in middle school, who just like watching him on stage being asked questions about his knowledge of crash retrieval, he was like squirming down into the chair because we're so not used to this idea of notoriety. It's like, I don't know how Lou does it. And there are some times when I saw him in DC at the hearings, like when they came out, where you could kind of tell he was like, holy shit, I just did that. Like even though he had already had interviews, he'd been on TV. I mean, sitting in that room was really, really something, was really intimidating. And I actually kind of um, acquired kind of a newfound respect for congressmen that I'd always been extremely um just nihilistic about like they don't give a fuck about us, they're self-serving and none of this is meaningful and this is all a giant trope and whatever. But like sitting there in that room like on camera talking about this stuff and taking it seriously, I was like, this is really exposed, this is really vulnerable for whether it's powers that be that kind of don't want you talking about this, or people that think you sound ridiculous, or
Yeah.
constituents who think that you're wasting your time and whatever. It's just really exposed. I couldn't get over that. So I would say, like, not to point at any one single event, but the degree of seriousness that the number of really serious people, David Fravor, Carl Nell, David Grusch, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, um, those kind of people who have acted in a manner in which they're completely convinced it's real, based on a lot of knowledge they have that's not public, compounded with, this is the other side of the coin. For about a year, after I got this book, I decided I wanted to go back and inventory every publicly known attempt at gravity manipulation technology or physics that I could find. What do we know that was complete horseshit? What do we know that has not been totally vetted? And what is like the bleeding edge that we're thinking about right now? And where are maybe there's some sensible paths forward? So, for instance, that podcast that just went up, the Eco Futures, the National Science Foundation and DOE thing that Hal Puthoff and Larry Forsley were talking on. Have you listened to
Yeah.
it yet?
Yeah, man. My video today was about that, actually, that I released today.
So weird kismet. I met Larry Forsley at UAPDF's private event after the hearings, and we just nerded the hell out on lattice confinement fusion and a bunch of other stuff because it turned out he knew my graduate advisor and all kinds of things. Brilliant guy, and the degree of seriousness and the avenues of scientific investigation that certain key people have pursued in the public domain since about the 80s, to me, starts to sew pieces together in this story and say that unequivocally there's been government involvement in steering research in certain directions quietly, but like Eric Weinstein famously said, like, where are all the scientists? Because he kind of refused to believe that like some goose stepping Lockheed Martin aerospace engineers in a bunker had seen like the zenith of his discipline of theoretical physics, and some 19-year-old airman was just kind of smoking a cigarette while anti-gravity sat there and worked. He like needed to believe that there were credible people that he respected who were being poached somewhere from prestigious universities. I think that's been going on. I think they've just been working through UARCs, the university affiliated research centers that get DoD funding, and they've been working at their universities. And many of these UARCs have SCIFs. They do. They're like on site. They have classified facilities. I've been to one at USU. And so they don't need to go to an Air Force base. They don't need to go to Lockheed to do some of this classified research. There's a way to do it, in a way that's more local and just right out in, sort of out in the open when it comes to, there's certain math and science and physics and chemistry that could be incredibly germane to like a really sensitive classified project, but to a completely uninitiated, non-technical person, you wouldn't have any idea that that's what you're listening to,
Yeah. That's interesting. Your answer kind of grew there because at the beginning it was kind of like, well, why would this person lie? But honestly, that last part you're kind of saying it makes a lot of sense, to be honest with you. I don't know if I've heard that explanation before.
And I think it's a composite picture, right? I think that when you ask 100 different people from like say UFO X and they give all their different answers, you could tweeze through all those answers and find like kernels of objectively agreeableness that others would agree with. And the moment you start sewing together that composite, you get to a point where it becomes more of a strain on belief that there's some convoluted explanation other than this, something else that's not this, that explains all these things without it being NHI, UAP, landing, being retrieved, being reverse engineered.
I mean, there's a lot of threads there. I don't even know if we have the time. I definitely have a lot of pushback on this, to be honest with you. Just my gut reaction to hearing some of this, because I think, well, there can be other explanations for all the things you said. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's that. But let's just start with like, let's say, okay, so in your job, right, you're working R&D at this aerospace, like, right, you're trying to work on something physical, let's say a missile, right, or whatever, right, some sort of propellant, right? Would you go in and test certain things because, well, Joe said it'll work, and why would he lie? Right? No, you need to see like actual evidence that it has nothing to do with a person. Right. Does that make sense? So like,
right.
That seems like a stretch to jump to. Well, yeah, we definitely have alien tech, because why would all these people lie? I mean, people lie for all kinds of reasons. I think if our
you make an excellent point.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think the problem we have as civilians in the public sector is that we're not able to see the information behind the wall that these people are making their public decisions based on.
Sure.
And so in your example, yes, granted, I would not take somebody's word for something. I'd want to see the artifact. I'd want to see the, by the artifact, I mean like the report, this, the test, whatever it is, because there's no reason I can't see it. But in this situation, I guess the reason I say, why would they all lie? It's not necessarily why would they all lie. Why would they all behave in such a manner that according to their internal decision-making only makes sense if they're convinced it's real? Like, because people can't always conceal, people won't generally make decisions that like harm themselves or make no sense from their own perspective, from their own self-serving, because everybody at the end of the day is self-serving. So if the actions they take appear to only make sense if these things are true behind the scenes, or I should say, if they're convinced those things are true behind the scenes, they could always be wrong. They could always be in error. People point at Grusch and say, oh, I believe he saw a documentation that claims such and such. I think there are problems with that, but at the end of the day, I think their actions tell the story that they think it's true.
Sure. I mean, but people make decisions for all kinds of reasons, and the self-serving that you're talking about, I agree with, but there could be many reasons for that self-serving. There could be, when people say, well, it does them no good to come out and say, well, actually it
Sure,
does.
sure.
They end up on TV, they get books, they go to conferences, they make money, they become a celebrity in this field. So that idea doesn't really hold water for me personally. I think that's for anyone else, but I don't know how that really hurts them,
Yeah. I
especially
hear you.
the stigma
I
has
don't think that's
changed.
favorable. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, that's the thing. Everyone's going to look at it differently, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
essentially. But I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think what I liked about what you were saying earlier is the idea that where did all the scientists go, and they could be stuck on string theory, and where, like Eric Weinstein said, right, like just stuck working on string theory, but all the real scientists have been working in these other places, trying to reverse engineer this tech that maybe we've had. I mean, that seems kind of logical that might happen, and that at some point our government said we've got to start funneling our smartest people to be working on this thing. How do we do that and keep it a secret, for so long? I mean, there would have to be this massive undergoing to basically lie to the American people and lie to the scientific community. And I think if there was a way for that to happen, that kind of makes sense. So I guess basically at the end of the day, your conclusion is you think that we have this stuff, but you don't know if we have this stuff.
Correct. Oh
Am
yeah.
I
Yeah, that's
right?
correct.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
that's fair. I think that's a fair
yeah.
point to make.